Welcome back. Of course, so we are continuing this morning's conversation with a look into now the supposition of the criminalization of the ukuthwala custom, which involves the abducting of children to make brides. That's what we're talking about this morning. So my guest, Nokwacha Zulu, is a cultural expert from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Leslie Ann Foster, founder and director of Masimanyane Women's Rights International, as well as Mongega Mhlawudi, who's the author of The Relevance of Ukuthwala in Xhosa Modern Society. We're attempting to actually unpack this morning. Why does it happen? What is propelling it? How does civil society say, no, this shouldn't be the right way to go about doing things? Leslie Ann, to bring you in here around the transactions that actually happen for it. So are we saying that here, because of society's state of economic injustice, one would say, and because of the poverty that still persists within the inequalities that exist within civil society, that we're seeing that children now are perhaps what we trade off for a quick buck? Right, that the girl child becomes that much of an easy commodity to trade off so that I can get, you know, a couple of thousand rands so that I can keep going. And if that's the case, what voice does that child have? Because it seems as though all we're doing now is passing around a human being, and we're expecting that human being just should go about with whatever, you know, whatever custom we put in place so that we can benefit from them. What is happening?
Well, I think the economic aspect of it is one driver of, forced and child marriages, because it's two different things, as we've heard. And it is an important driver currently because of, the state of poverty in our society. But I think it's important to locate this within the status of women. How are women viewed in our society, women and girls? And the reality is that from birth, women have low status, girls have low status in our society. That's the current and prevailing norm that actually drives violence against women very, very strongly in our society. And that's what we have to address, is the actual norms and the behaviors of our communities. So education is needed. What we're seeing as Masimanyane is that when girls are twala'd, they are missed at school. That's the first port of call, is they've been going to school and suddenly they're not going to school, or they're forced to go to school wearing their, marriage attire. Now, that should be a point at which this case is reported, if it has already taken place. Preferably before that even happens, because by the time she's married, so many violations have taken place. So we need education, we need social cohesion in our society, and we need programs that can help communities to improve their economic status. And we need to say that it's just wrong. It's just wrong for children to be violated in this way. And I think that education is not coming through. I also want to say that there is another gender dimension to this, in that it is males who determine whether children are going to be married off and who they're going to be married off to. By the time the mothers get to hear about this, they are incensed, oftentimes, and they want to stop the practice. But by then it has already been concluded between males. So it's really the education of communities that is required. It's economic improvement in the lives of people. We need, and so why this law is important is because in criminalizing it, it will act as some form of a deterrent, but it's not going to be enough. You can't pass laws to change attitudes and behaviors. There's another process that's needed, and that's the process that we require. I just want to mention very briefly that we do have a national strategic plan on gender-based violence and femicide, and in that plan there's a section that deals with children and deals with prevention of these kinds of crimes. So we really have a blueprint already for what needs to happen in terms of prevention, in terms of care and support, and it's that plan that is helping us to look at what legislative gaps there are and how do we address those gaps.
Well, just to pick up and to add on that, it's always good when the law stands in favor of the people. However, we also understand in the South African context that our biggest issue is not the law, it's the application and the enforcement of law. And that's where we always lack, is the law being implemented in civil society. So now calling for this by, the Law Commission to actually enforce and to criminalise ukuthwala. It's unfortunate to say it does not mean that law will be followed by civil society. If you are not able to monitor, if you're not able to evaluate, if you're not able to enforce that law, then you can have wonderful law on paper and wonderful legislation on paper. It does not translate onto the ground. So what can be better done to actually allow for this law to be a breathing entity and to actually be alive within certain communities? Because you can imagine some communities will say, you can keep your law, I will keep my cultural practice. And they will still continue with the process, even with the existence of the law. So how then do we enforce the law?
This is what I'm saying, is that there's education that's needed. Often we're asking the very people who come from communities and uphold the cultural or traditional practices to be the people that actually implement, or oversee implementation of the law. That's very problematic. That's why education at all levels, and particularly of state agents, is required. We need to integrate the principles of democracy, of social justice, of human rights into our societies a lot better than we are doing at the moment. We're seeing the violation of rights. We're seeing, a lack of respect for the dignity of others on a wide scale in our country. And some of those drivers are economic, as we said, but a lot of them is about social norms.
Yeah.
And that needs to change. And we need education. We need prevention programs. We have dealt with gender-based violence from a victim perspective. After the crime has happened, we're saying we need victim support. That's not correct. We need to prevent it from even happening. And that's education on a very wide scale. We need to bring that education into the curriculum at schools. We need to teach human rights at a far deeper level and understand it, and have communities actually adopt that. Because we have different systems that are prevailing in our country at the moment. We have the democratic system, then we have the cultural and traditional system in many societies. And I'm not talking only about African societies, but there are just so many of these different societies where these things are practiced. We don't always recognize it because it's on a smaller scale, but it is happening there.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the issues, prevention.
I just want to interject there. And Bonge, just to check if you can still hear us, because that question, I did pose it to you regarding the enforcement of law. Can you still hear us? Are you still with us?
Yes, I'm still with you.
Okay, great stuff. So did you receive that question around the enforcement? And thank you very much, Leslie, for picking it up. Just to expound on it around from a cultural, from a practical perspective, how then do we ensure the enforcement of law, especially where people now are at the helm? I don't think you can hear us, Bongeka. Okay, maybe I'm going to pose that question to you as well, Nokwacha, around helping us and helping societies actually enforce the law.
Thank you. You see, the problem with issues such as these is that any crime has to be reported, you see. If nobody reports that there's a crime of forced marriage that has taken place, it will simply go on and on and on, despite the law that is there. So, in a sense, it would mean that the Law Commission has to go down to the lowest level of municipalities, where they can sensitize the structures there, that if they are aware of any forced marriage that has taken place, they should report it. Because if it is not reported, then it goes unrecognized. And the reason why not even some, the majority of cases are not reported is the question that is patriarchy, which is still prevalent in our societies. people just regard it as, well, that man wants that woman, as if they are possession. And it is patriarchy that drives this thing. But now, sensitizing people to move against these patriarchal issues and making them aware that ukuthwala or forced marriage or any of these marriages that are not an agreement between the two people who are supposed to get in is crime. I think sensitizing the community is the most important thing.
Yeah.
That if you see it, then report it, because those who are involved in it often don't report it. It's like a case of family or the so-called domestic violence, where it happens, it goes on and on and on and on, and then when you report it, sometimes it's even the woman herself who say, no, I don't want to put a case. There's too much that is put on the shoulders of a woman, not only by men, but by the society. That includes women as well. Ubegezele. You know that word.
Yeah.
Yes, you put up with it. Till when? Till you die. You see, that is a problem. So the society should not agree. In fact, they should report it.
Yeah.
On behalf
I want to be able to pick
people.
up on that, and just because we're very limited on time, Nokwaja, you said something very profound around the existence of patriarchy and the role and how alive patriarchy still is in our community. Bonga, I'm going to try you one last time in being able to expound on breaking these patriarchal norms, and even ask you about, where does the mother of the child fit into all of this? You know, how does the mother of the child actually possess power in all of this? Or does she just simply go with what the men are saying?
Okay. Thank you very much. Can I speak?
Go ahead.
Okay. In some cases, okay. In some instances, the mother is involved in the kidnapping or in the ukuthwala of her child, where she's given the money by the man. Or in some instances, the mother is away, so the child is staying with the relatives. And then so the relative, they see that, okay, no, this child, maybe the uncles, in most cases, it's usually the uncles. So they want to make money out of this girl child. So now, because the mother is away, maybe working in another province, so they are the ones taking care of the child. So now they think that it is okay for them to take the child to whoever is bringing the money home. So now what happens? Even if the mother, because I've just read some stories where the mother comes back to find out that her child has been married off to an old man or old young man. And then now, so it brings us to the case whereby women's voices they are not really heard in our societies. So now, because she's just a woman, so now no one's going to listen to her. So no one cares about her opinion, including of the child, because this child is a girl child. So mothers, in most cases, in some cases, they are involved, and then in some cases, they are not involved.
Yeah, it really is a sad state of affairs where we see that patriarchy still persists and is still very much alive in our communities, and patriarchy to the detriment of children in this case. I'm going to give us just some time for reflections on just closing remarks in terms of how do we take this conversation further and actually make it alive to our communities. Where do we start? Liz, I'm going to start off with you around where do we start in taking accountability as society, and where do we start in being able to actually implement effective change within our communities?
Well, I'm going to refer us to the National Strategic Plan on GBV again and Pillar 1, which is about accountability and leadership. We should be working with the leaders of society, our religious leaders who have captive audiences every Sunday, our traditional and cultural leaders, our municipal leaders, right down, and Prof was right about this. We need to go right down to grassroots level and start that educational process. We've got a moral regeneration movement in the country. That movement should be actively working, and it is in some areas working, but not widely enough. So we need to have that education happening. We can turn the tide on all of these issues with the proper education and support right at grassroots level. Those are my closing remarks. Accountability and leadership of all people that have responsibility in society, and go right down to grassroots level to make that change happen.
Yeah, and to follow on what Leslie has just said, Nokwacha, around, can you just expand for us the role of men in this entire discourse? And how then do we start talking to men? There's a saying that it's one thing where women can complain about the status quo amongst women, but the men need to come to the party. Where do you start in addressing men about the perpetuating of patriarchy, the perpetuating of the kidnapping of little girls? As you were saying, these are men who are taking little girls and are making them wives. How do you speak to men as a man?
Yes, let me say first, no, not first, because that is the only thing I'm going to mention. Not all men approve of ukuthwala. There are many, many men who are against it. Those who also don't want to see it happening in their community. But there's this issue of the element of it is theirs in our society, where people feel you are interfering and you are being accused of being nosy, you are interfering in other people's matters. Why don't you look at your own family and leave other people's family? So there is that pressure, and it goes under the umbrella of being respectful, being responsible for social issues. But what Leslie is saying is that, I mean, I agree with her. We need to educate the society. This matter should go to the churches, that as from today, ukuthwala is outlawed. There are many churches there that can distribute that message, and the message reaches many people within a short time. So I believe the church can be the main driver, because there are men, there are other structures that are there. Let me hold it there. Yeah. Thank you.
The role of the church is a very interesting role. And Bongega, if there's a young girl or little girl that is perhaps listening to this show by some chance and saying, I'm going through this, or I'm also being considered to be married off to someone and it's not from my choice, what do we say to that little girl? I mean, how do we even reach out to her? What must she do?
Okay, thank you. First, I would advise young adults to report such incidents to their teachers, because the school is where they are every day, or they must report it to the nearest police stations. That's where they can get help. They must just talk about it. They must tell other people, because I am sure they're not very comfortable about this, and I know that it's not their decision. Someone else has taken a decision for them. So they must stand up for themselves and take responsibility, and then they must also know their rights. So they must speak up now. Times have changed. It's time we talk about these things. It's time we report these cases to the people, to the law. We take this to the police station. They must go straight to the police station. They must not be scared like they do. I know that sometimes it might seem that you are being disrespectful, if you saying you don't agree if your family is marrying you off to someone, and then they agree with that person, so you have a right to say no. You must stand on your own. Girls must stand up on their own and talk about the issue and report it as much as possible as they can.
I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to ask that we leave it there for now. And thank you very much for your insights, Leslie and Nokocha, as well as you, Bongega, for just joining us and shedding some light in terms of how prevalent is it in the South African context, the practice of ukuthwala, when you take a little girl and you marry her off. And it usually is happening, unfortunately, among certain pockets in society. Still, in 2022, it actually continues to happen in certain pockets and certain communities in South Africa. While Nokwacha Zulu is a cultural expert from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Leslie Ann Foster, founder and director at Masimanyane Women's Rights International, and Bongeka Mhlawuli, who's the author of The Relevance of Ukuthwala in Xhosa Modern Society as well. So thank you very much to all my guests.